Dr. Ethan Caldwell grabbed the rookie nurse by the arm and shoved her back against the wall, his voice dropping to a razor-thin whisper that cut through the chaos of the trauma bay like a blade. You do not move unless I tell you to move. You do not speak unless I tell you to speak. And you absolutely do not touch my patient. His fingers pressed hard into her forearm. Emily Carter looked at him, not with fear, not with tears, but with a stillness so complete it made him let go first. She said nothing. She didn't have to. Because in less than 20 minutes, this man would be begging her to step in, and the whole room would watch him do it. If you are new here, welcome. Please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The night shift at Seaside Regional Hospital never announced itself gently. It arrived like a freight train, all noise and pressure, in the smell of antiseptic and blood, and it did not slow down for anyone, least of all for the new girl. Emily Carter had signed in at the nurse's station at precisely 6:58 in the evening, 2 minutes before her shift was supposed to begin. She set her bag down, clipped her ID badge to the left side of her scrubs, and stood quietly at the edge of the ER floor, taking in the layout the way someone memorizes a room before the lights go out. Not nervous, not wide-eyed, just watching. Her supervisor, a heavy-set woman named Linda Marsh, who had been running the ER floor for 11 years, walked past her with a clipboard and barely glanced up. Carter, you're assigned to triage intake and overflow beds tonight. Stay out of Trauma Bay 1 unless I call you in. You understand? Yes, ma'am. Linda stopped walking and looked at her properly for the first time. Something about the way Emily answered, no hesitation, no question back, no attempt to make small talk or seem likable, made Linda study her for just a second longer than usual. Then she moved on. Emily picked up her first chart and got to work. For the first hour and a half, she handled intake with a quietness that the other nurses on the floor started to notice. Not because she was slow or uncertain, she was the opposite. She moved through assessments with a kind of practiced efficiency that didn't match the resume they'd been given. New graduate, first placement, no prior hospital experience listed. But the way she checked a patient's airway, the way her fingers found a pulse point without looking, the way she held a screaming child's hand and said 4 calm words and had the child breathing evenly in under a minute, none of that was new graduate behavior. It was something else entirely. A younger nurse named Priya pulled up beside her at the medication station around 8:15 and said low-voiced, "Where did you say you trained?" "I didn't," Emily said, not unkindly. She pulled a medication tray and moved on. Priya watched her go and didn't ask again. The radio call came in at 8:47. Linda Marsh was the one who took it, and the floor watched her face change. In 11 years, they had learned to read that face like a weather map. The slight tightening around her eyes meant incoming trauma. The way she pressed her lips together before she spoke meant it was bad. Tonight she did both, and then she said something none of them had heard before. "All non-essential personnel clear Trauma Bay 1, Sean. Now, security to the main entrance." And somebody called Dr. Caldwell. She hung up the radio and turned to the floor with the kind of controlled urgency that barely contained what was underneath it. "We have a military transport inbound. High-value patient gunshot wound to the left side. He's got a combat K9 in transport with him. The dog does not leave the patient. Those are the orders that we have been given, and I don't know more than that yet." She paused. "I need my 3 best trauma nurses in Bay 1, and I need everyone else to make room." The floor moved. People scattered to their stations. Priya grabbed Emily's arm as she passed. "You hear that military patient? They're saying he came in from some kind of active firefight. They're not saying where." Emily set down her chart and turned toward Trauma Bay 1 without being told to go. She was not one of the 3 nurses Linda had called. She knew that. She went anyway, positioning herself just outside the bay entrance where she could see everything without being in the way. Nobody noticed her standing there. Everyone was looking at the doors. The transport team came through at 8:59. 4 people moving fast around a gurney. The man on it was big, broad across the chest, thick through the shoulders, even lying down, and he was conscious, which was worse in some ways. Conscious meant he knew where he was. Conscious meant he was fighting. His left hand was wrapped in a field compress already soaked through, and there was a second wound at his side that the trauma team was going to have to address the moment they got him in position. General Thomas Harkins, 61 years old, 37 years in uniform. 3 combat tours, 2 commendations that the public knew about, and several more that would never appear in any record anyone could pull. And at the foot of his gurney, moving like a low shadow, was Ranger. The dog was a Belgian Malinois, 92 pounds of muscle and conditioning, with ears flat against his skull and eyes that swept the room in a constant rolling assessment. He was on a short lead attached to the gurney rail, but even on lead, every person in that hallway felt the animal's attention like a physical pressure against their chest. The transport officer holding the rail on the general's left side had his eyes on the dog more than on the patient, and that alone told Emily everything she needed to know about the situation. Dr. Ethan Caldwell came through the trauma bay doors at a stride that communicated without a single word that he considered his arrival to be the most important event currently occurring in the building. He was 44 attended and had the kind of confidence that people who have never been seriously wrong tend to develop. He looked at the patient, looked at the chart being thrust at him, and then looked at the dog, and his entire energy shifted. "What is that animal doing in my trauma bay?" The transport officer started to explain military working dog, certified therapy and protection animal handler is the patient's separation is medically contraindicated per standing orders, and Caldwell talked over him before he was halfway through the sentence. "I don't care about standing orders from whatever branch sent this man here. This is my department. Get the dog out." "Sir, the dog is trained to stay with security." Caldwell turned and spoke across the room. "I need the animal removed. Now." 2 security officers moved in from either side. Ranger saw them coming before they took their third step. The dog's body dropped into a crouch that was not submission, it was preparation, and the sound that came out of his chest was not a bark. It was lower than that. It was the sound of a decision being made. The closer security officer stopped walking. He was a large man, former police, 6 years on hospital security, and he stopped walking because the animal in front of him had just communicated something to him on a frequency below language, and his body had understood it perfectly. "Sir," he said over his shoulder to Caldwell. "I don't think." Ranger lunged. He didn't reach the officer because the lead caught him, but the surge of that 92-pound body against the rail shook the entire gurney, and General Harkins groaned through his teeth and reached out with his right hand toward the dog, not to stop him, but to touch him to let the animal know he was there. And that single motion pulled on his side wound, and the monitor attached to his chest spiked, and every nurse in that bay moved at once, except they couldn't get close. Every time someone stepped toward the gurney, Ranger repositioned. He wasn't attacking randomly, he was defending the perimeter. Anyone inside a certain radius got the full weight of his attention, the low sound, the drop stance, the eyes that did not blink, and that was enough. People stopped. Grown adults, trained medical professionals who ran toward car crashes and cardiac events, and bleeding children stopped walking because that animal told them to stop. Caldwell's voice went up half an octave. "Somebody get animal control. Get them here now, and get that man off that gurney and onto the table before he bleeds out in the hallway." Linda Marsh put her hand on his arm. "Ethan, slow down. If we rush this and the dog makes contact with one of my nurses, your nurses are not my concern right now. The patient is. The patient is stable enough for us to take 30 seconds and think. He is not stable. Did you look at this chart? He needs us to not panic," Linda said, and her voice was so flat and certain that Caldwell actually stopped talking. The room went into a different kind of tense. Not the emergency tense, the worst kind, the stalemate kind, where nobody knows the next move, and everyone is waiting for someone else to make it. General Harkins turned his head toward the standoff. His face was gray with blood loss and pain, but his eyes were clear, and when he spoke, his voice had the particular quality of a man who had spent decades being listened to in rooms full of people who were frightened. "Nobody touches that dog, you hear me? Nobody touches Ranger." "General, with respect," Caldwell started. "That dog has saved my life 4 times. You are not removing him from this room." He coughed, and the cough was wet, and Linda's eyes went to the monitor, and the number she saw made her press her lips together again. "He stays. You work around him. Figure it out." Caldwell turned away and said quietly, but not quietly enough, "Somebody get me a sedative for the animal, something we can put in food." Priya caught Emily's eye across the room. Emily was still standing in the doorway. She had not moved. She was watching Ranger, not the doctors, not the general. Watching the way the animal's weight was distributed. the micro movements of his head, the pattern of where his eyes went and how long they stayed. She was reading something. "That's not going to work," Emily said. She said it quietly, but the room was quiet enough that it carried. Caldwell turned and looked at her for the first time. "Excuse me, the sedative in food, he won't take it. He's trained not to accept food from strangers in a high alert state. You'd have to get it close enough to try, and you can't get close enough to try." She paused. "And if someone does get close enough and he sees the attempt, the general is going to have a harder time holding him." Caldwell stared at her. "Who are you?" "Bayem, Emily Carter. I'm on intake tonight." "Intake." He said the word the way someone says something they've just stepped in. "You're a nurse on intake, so you have no business being in this room, and you definitely have no business telling me, Ethan." Linda's voice again, with a different weight this time. Something had shifted in Linda's face when Emily spoke. Linda was watching Emily the same way Emily had been watching the dog. "Let her talk." Caldwell spread his hands in a gesture that managed to be both dismissive and contemptuous simultaneously. "By all means." Emily stepped fully into the room. Ranger's head swung toward her immediately. The low sounds started again, that subterranean warning, and she didn't stop walking. Not fast, not slow. She moved with the kind of deliberate calm that isn't performed, that comes from a body that has made itself quiet in worse places than this, in darker rooms, in moments when the sound of any movement could be the last sound someone made. Priya whispered, "What is she doing?" Nobody answered. Emily was 7 feet from the gurney when Ranger fully committed to her. His body dropped lower, his ears pinned back completely, and the sound in his chest expanded into something that made the security officer behind her take 3 involuntary steps backward. She stopped. Not because she was afraid, because she wanted the dog to see her stop. She wanted him to register that she was choosing to slow down, that she was giving him that, and she stood there for 4 full seconds, just breathing, while Ranger read her the way she had been reading him. Then she spoke. "Nightingale, hold." 2 words. Not loud, not soft. Exactly level, exactly, even the kind of voice that a trained animal hears, not just with its ears, but with everything it has been conditioned to respond to. Ranger froze. Not startled, not confused. He froze the way a machine freezes when the right switch is thrown completely instantly, with total precision. His whole body came to stillness. His weight shifted back. His head came up 1/2 inch. And then he looked at Emily with an expression that no one in that room could quite name, because it wasn't aggression anymore, and it wasn't submission. It was something between recognition and waiting. The room had gone so silent that the monitor beeping above the general's gurney sounded like it was in a cathedral. Nobody breathed. Dr. Caldwell's mouth was open. He closed it, opened it again, said nothing. Linda Marsh had both hands pressed flat against the nurse's station counter, and she was staring at Emily Carter like she was seeing her for the first time, which was not exactly wrong. Emily took 1 more step forward. Ranger watched her come. She reached out her right hand, knuckles down, palm turned slightly away, not an offer, a presentation, and held it there. The dog leaned forward and touched his nose to her hand. Just touched it. A single point of contact that lasted less than a second. Then he just sat on his haunches on the floor beside the general's gurney and looked at her with those unblinking eyes. General Harkins turned his head. He looked at the woman standing beside his dog. "Who are you?" he said. Not the way Caldwell had said it, demanding, dismissive. The general said it the way a man says it when the answer actually matters. Emily looked at him. "Someone who worked with dogs like Ranger. A long time ago." The general studied her face. Something moved in his expression, not recognition exactly, but the place recognition comes from. Something in the shape of her stillness, the way she held herself, the words she had spoken. Where he said, she didn't answer that question. Not yet. Instead, she turned to the trauma team, and when she spoke this time, her voice had a different quality. Not the calm of someone holding themselves together, but the calm of someone who has never needed to hold herself together in a room like this. "His left lateral wound has a higher bleed rate than the compress is showing. He needs imaging before you move him to the table, and you need to check his right leg. He's been guarding it since they brought him in. He probably doesn't know he's doing it." She looked at Linda. "Do you want me to stay?" Linda Marsh looked at Dr. Caldwell. Caldwell's jaw was tight. His whole face was tight. He was the kind of man who did not like being wrong in front of people. and he had just been wrong in the most visible way possible in front of his entire trauma team, in front of security, in front of a new nurse who was supposed to be doing intake. He wanted to send her out of the room. Everything in him wanted that. He looked at General Harkins, whose color was not improving. He looked at Ranger, who was sitting calmly on the floor with his eyes on Emily Carter. "Stay," Caldwell said. The word came out of him like something he had bitten off at the stem. Emily stepped to the left side of the gurney, and the room began to move again. The trauma team swept back into position with the efficiency that kicks in when a medical team knows what it's doing and finally has room to do it. Monitors were adjusted, the compress was changed, imaging was ordered. Emily worked alongside Priya without being asked, anticipating the next step in the sequence. The way someone anticipates the next word in a sentence they have already finished reading. She called out the general's blood pressure before the number appeared on the screen. She noticed a change in his breathing pattern and flagged it to Caldwell 40 seconds before his own assessment would have caught it. Caldwell caught it when it was flagged. He said nothing, but his eyes went to her hands, to the way they moved, and whatever he was thinking, he kept it behind his teeth. Priya leaned in close at one point and said very quietly, "You have done this before." Emily said, and handed her a fresh compress. "That is not a nursing school answer." "No," Emily said, "it's not." General Harkins was not unconscious. He was in significant pain and running on fumes and military-grade willpower, but his eyes stayed open and his attention stayed in the room. He watched Emily the way someone watches a word they know, but cannot quite place, turning it over and over in their mind, looking for the angle where it resolves into meaning. When the imaging results came back and Caldwell stepped away to review them, the general turned his head toward Emily. "You didn't answer my question," and he said, "No. Nightingale is a Tier 1 code phrase. It is not in any civilian database. It is not in any training manual that exists outside of a classified registry." His voice was low and careful, every word placed like a foot finding solid ground. "The only people who know that phrase are people who have operated in a very specific operational context." Emily checked the IV line. She checked the monitor. She did not look at him. "Ranger responded to you," he said, "not because you said the right words, because he recognized the person saying them. Dogs like Ranger don't just learn commands. They learn the pattern of the person giving them, their breathing rate, their body chemistry, the way their weight shifts." He paused. "He recognized you." Emily looked at him then. Her eyes were dark and still and gave away almost nothing. Almost. "Get some rest, General," she said. "You lost a significant amount of blood." "Who are you?" he said again. And this time the question landed differently, heavier, the full weight of what he was actually asking pressing through those three small words. The monitor above him beeped. Emily adjusted something on the IV stand. She looked at General Thomas Harkins, this man who had survived 37 years and 3 combat tours and a firefight that had brought him here tonight, and she made the decision that she had known from the moment she walked into this hospital she would eventually have to make. She leaned in, close enough that only he could hear. She said 4 words. His eyes changed, not widening, going still. The stillness of complete recognition. The stillness of a man who has just solved a problem he had been working on for a very long time. And the answer is not what he expected, but it is without question the truth. His right hand, the uninjured one, moved across the gurney and found hers. He held it for 1 second. Not a patient reaching for a nurse. Not a man clutching for comfort. Just one person acknowledging another. Seeing them, fully, for exactly what they are. Then Caldwell came back with the imaging results, and the moment closed like water closing over a stone. Ranger lifted his head, looked once at Emily, and settled back down. And Emily Carter, rookie nurse intake assignment, first shift at Seaside Regional Hospital, went back to work. The imaging results were bad, not catastrophically bad, not the kind of bad that ends a conversation before it starts, but bad enough that Dr. Caldwell's face did the thing it did when he was recalculating. His jaw set, his eyes went distant for exactly 3 seconds. Then he came back into the room fully and started talking fast. "We've got fragmentation near the lateral rib cage. 2 fragments, one sitting close enough to the pleural lining that if he takes a hard breath at the wrong angle, we're looking at a puncture." He held up the imaging for the team and pointed with 2 fingers. "We need to get him stabilized enough for surgical consult within the next 40 minutes. Sedation protocol, standard trauma dose, and I need..." "He'll fight the sedation," Emily said. Caldwell looked at her. The look had a warning in it. He had allowed her to stay. He had not invited her to run commentary on his treatment plan. Excuse me, General Harkins. He'll fight the sedation. His cortisol levels right now are going to metabolize a standard trauma dose faster than you're planning for. You'll think he's under, and he won't be, and when he comes back up mid-procedure, you're going to have a problem. She didn't say it to challenge him. She said it the same way she said everything level factual without decoration. You need to adjust the weight to dosage calculation. Add 15%. The room held its breath. Caldwell set the imaging down. He looked at her for a long moment, and what moved behind his eyes was not quite anger. It was something more uncomfortable than anger. It was the first edge of doubt in a man who had built his entire professional identity on not doubting himself. And you know this because I've worked with people like him, Emily said. High-stress physiological profile, combat conditioning. His body doesn't respond to sedation the same way a civilian patient does. It fights it. That's not a medical opinion. That's just how it works. General Harkins, who had been listening from the gurney with his eyes at half-mast, said without opening them fully, "She's right." Caldwell's attention snapped to the general. "Last surgery I had was 2 years ago. Shoulder reconstruction. They put me under twice." The general's voice was slower now, the blood loss and the pain eating at the edges of his words, but the core of it was still steel. "Second time worked." Caldwell looked at Linda Marsh. Linda gave him nothing, just that steady, flat gaze that she used when she was letting him make his own decision and watching to see what kind of decision it was. He picked up the chart. He adjusted the order. He did not look at Emily when he did it. Emily went back to monitoring the IV line and said nothing further. Priya caught her eye from across the gurney and raised both eyebrows in an expression that said several things at once, none of them out loud. Emily gave her the smallest possible shake of her head. "Not now," Priya looked away. The next 18 minutes were all precision and motion. The trauma team worked with the focused economy of people who are good at what they do and know it, and Emily moved inside that current without disrupting it, handing things before they were asked for, tracking the monitor, with the peripheral attention of someone who has learned to keep multiple threads alive simultaneously without dropping any of them. It was the kind of skill that takes years to build. It was also the kind of skill that builds in very specific environments. And the more the team watched her, the more the gap between what her file said and what she was doing in front of them became impossible to ignore. It was Priya who finally said it out loud. She waited until they were both at the supply station, backs to the main team, voices low. "Your nursing license is from 18 months ago." "Yes," Emily said. "You graduated in the top 3% of your cohort." "Yes. And before that, your file has a 6-year gap." Priya kept her voice completely neutral, which was itself a kind of statement. "Between your undergrad and nursing school, 6 years, nothing listed." Emily selected the supplies she needed and didn't answer. "I'm not asking to be nosy," Priya said. "I'm asking because I've been working this floor for 4 years and I have never seen a first placement nurse do what you just did. Not once. And I've been trying to figure out what to do with that information for the last 20 minutes. Emily turned and looked at her. Priya had a frank, open face, the kind that had probably never successfully hidden a feeling in its life, and right now it was showing something that wasn't suspicion. It was closer to concern, and behind the concern, something that might have been protectiveness. Like she was already on Emily's side and wasn't entirely sure how she'd gotten there. "What information?" Emily said. Priya blinked. Then she understood, and she gave a small, slow nod that said clearly, all right, I see how this works." And she picked up her supplies and went back to work. It was at the 30-minute mark that everything shifted again. The surgical consult team arrived, 2 surgeons, and they're attending, pushing through the doors with the particular authority of people who have been called in and resent having been called in. And Dr. Caldwell went to meet them with the imaging in hand. The moment he moved away from the gurney, General Harkins opened his eyes fully for the first time since they'd gotten the sedation adjusted. He looked at Emily. "Come here," he said. She came to the side of the gurney. Ranger, sitting on the floor between them, lifted his head and then settled it again, content. "How long have you been out?" the general asked. Emily checked the monitor before she answered, which gave her 2 seconds to decide how much to say. "A while." "Define a while." "Long enough to get a nursing license and a placement." Harkins studied her. Even half-sedated, his eyes had that quality, the quality of a man who had spent decades reading people in conditions that did not allow for error. You didn't leave voluntarily. It wasn't a question. Emily didn't answer it like one. The discharge was honorable, she said. That's a very careful answer. It's an accurate one. He was quiet for a moment. The monitor beeped. Somewhere on the other side of the room, Caldwell was explaining something to the surgical team with a lot of words and pointed gestures. Ranger exhaled through his nose and put his chin on his paws. I know who you are, the general said, and this time his voice was different. Not the interrogating tone, not the testing tone, just a man stating a fact. I've known since the moment you said the phrase. I just needed to look at your face to be sure. Emily's expression didn't change. General Ofshino, you were part of Bravo Medic Unit, attached to Special Operations. Forward deployed 3 rotations. He paused. You were the one they called in after the Kandahar situation. The monitor above them continued its steady rhythm. Emily's hand was on the IV stand, and her hand did not move, and her face did not move, and nothing about her moved except for the briefest fraction of a second, something behind her eyes. Like a door opening 1 inch and then closing again. I'm a nurse on intake, she said quietly. That's all. Emily. His voice was gentle now, the way someone is gentle when they understand exactly what they're touching. I spent 6 months trying to find out what happened to you after the discharge. I made calls. I pulled strings that I thought were long enough to reach. Nobody knew where you went. She looked at him. I didn't want to be found. I know that now. He was quiet for a moment. Were you running from something or towards something? She thought about the question, really thought about it the way you think about a question that nobody has asked you in so long that you almost forgot it existed. Both, she said, mostly toward nursing. People who need help, she said. That part doesn't change. It never changes. It's just the context. Harkins looked at her for a long time. Then he said, you saved my life tonight. Life. You're not in the clear yet, she said, because it was true and because it was easier than accepting the other thing. No, but I'm closer than I would have been if you hadn't been standing in that doorway. He turned his head slightly, looking toward where Caldwell was still gesturing at the imaging. That man would have kept fighting Ranger for another 10 minutes, might have been 15. In my current condition, that's not 15 minutes I had to spare. Emily said nothing, because she knew he was right and saying so seemed like the wrong kind of thing. I want to know why you're here, he said, at this hospital, in this city, on this exact shift. Because I was hired. Emily. She looked at him again, and this time something in her face shifted, not breaking, not crumbling, but adjusting, like someone who has been holding something at arm's length for so long that their arms have finally very slightly gotten tired. Because I needed to start over, she said, and this is where starting over looked like. A floor full of people who need care and don't know my name and don't know my file and will judge me by what I do in front of them. The general closed his eyes, opened them again. And in the last hour, he said, has that worked out? She looked across the room at Priya, who was charting with her head down and her jaw set in a way that meant she was thinking hard. At Linda Marsh, who was standing near the bay entrance and watching Emily with the expression of someone doing math. At Caldwell, who was still turned away, still talking to the surgical team, but whose shoulders had a different set to them now than they had had an hour ago. It's a process, Emily said. Harkins almost smiled. Almost. That's the most military answer you've given me. The surgical team consultation broke up. Caldwell came back toward the gurney with a look on his face that Emily had learned in the last hour to read as efficiently as a monitor reading. He was about to say something he didn't want to say. The way his chin was positioned, the way his eyes went to the middle distance before they found a person, the small controlled exhale through his nose. The surgical team concurs with the adjusted sedation protocol, he said. He directed this at the gurney, not specifically at Emily, but she was the only other person close enough to receive it. They also agree on the fragmentation assessment. He paused. The right leg assessment was also accurate. Hairline fractured tibia. He'd been compensating. Okay, Emily said. Caldwell looked at her then, really looked at her, not the way he'd been looking at her like a problem to be managed, but with something closer to actual attention. Where did you do your clinical hours? Various facilities, she said. Rural and urban. Rural and urban. He repeated it flatly. That's not an answer. It's the one I have. He studied her. In the pause, the monitor beeped 4 times. Ranger shifted on the floor. I've been in emergency medicine for 16 years, Caldwell said. I have trained dozens of nurses and residents. I can tell within the first hour of working with someone roughly where they are. He stopped. Started again. You are not where your file says you are. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, Emily said. That is also not an answer. No, she agreed, but it's true. He stood there for another second, and the thing in his face resolved into something that wasn't quite respect, but was the precursor to it, the thing that comes just before when someone has been wrong and knows it, but hasn't yet figured out what to replace the wrong thing with. Then he turned and went to the surgical scheduling station. Linda Marsh appeared at Emily's shoulder from nowhere the way she always did, as if she had learned to move through a floor without disturbing the air around her. You are going to explain yourself to me, Linda said quietly, pleasantly, in the exact tone of voice that meant it was not a request. Later, Emily said, when he's prepped. Linda looked at the general, looked at Emily. Later, she agreed, and she went back to managing her floor. The prep for surgery took 11 minutes. Emily stayed through all of it, working the left side of the gurney while the surgical nurses took the primary positions, and nobody told her to move. And she did not volunteer to move. And at some point in those 11 minutes, the surgical nurses stopped working around her and started working with her, which happened so gradually and naturally that none of them could have said exactly when it occurred. General Harkins went under cleanly at exactly 9:43. His last conscious action was to turn his head toward Ranger and say in the voice of a man who had spent his entire career inside impossible situations and walked out the other side of every single one, stay. Ranger stayed. And then there was the particular stillness of a trauma bay after the primary patient has been moved to surgery equipment, still humming monitors now tracking at maintenance level, the physical and emotional residue of everything that had happened in the last hour, settling into the room like sediment into water. Most of the team dispersed. Priya went to update charts. 2 of the surgical nurses followed their patient. Security, relieved of immediate duty, relocated to the hallway. Caldwell disappeared into his office with the surgical consult paperwork. It left Emily and Linda and Ranger. Ranger looked at Emily. Emily looked back at him. Linda stood with her arms crossed and her clipboard against her chest and said, All right, Emily said. Start wherever you want, Linda said. But start. Emily was quiet for a moment. Not stalling gathering. The way you gather yourself when the story you're about to tell is true and you haven't told it in a very long time, and the telling of it costs something real. 6 years before nursing school, she said, combat medic, special operations support. I worked in forward deployed units in 3 different theaters. My last assignment before discharge involved medical operations in conjunction with a K-9 unit. I worked with handlers and their dogs for 14 months. Ranger's handler before General Harkins trained out of the same facility I was attached to. That's where the phrase comes from. It's not a current code. It's old protocol, pre-2019. Linda absorbed this. Discharge. Honorable. Reason. Emily met her eyes. Medical. Linda waited, and when it became clear that was all she was getting, on that particular point, she moved on with the pragmatism of a woman who has heard enough half-explanations in 11 years to know which ones are finished and which ones are just paused. Your file says no prior hospital experience. That's accurate. My prior experience wasn't in a hospital, but it was medical. Yes. Trauma level. Yes. Linda was quiet. She looked at Ranger, who was still sitting precisely where the general had last seen him, his posture unchanged, his eyes moving in that slow, constant sweep. That dog trusted you, she said. And from what I understand about how that kind of trust works, that is not a small thing. No, Emily said, it's not. Linda uncrossed her arms. She set the clipboard down on the nearest flat surface, which was a thing Emily had not seen her do in the entire time she'd been on shift. And she looked at Emily Carter the way someone looks at a problem they have just realized they were solving from the wrong angle. I'm going to need you to resubmit your intake paperwork, she said, with more thorough documentation of your prior experience. Emily looked at her. Because what I am not willing to do, Linda continued, is put you on intake when you can clearly do considerably more than intake. She picked the clipboard back up. We'll sort out the specifics, but we start with honest paperwork. Emily was quiet for a moment. This was not what she had been expecting. She had been expecting questions or skepticism or demands that she explain herself to HR or some version of the careful institutional machinery that protects itself from irregular things. She had not been expecting this. Okay, she said. Good, Linda said. And then because she was Linda Marsh and she had a floor to run, she went and ran it. Emily stood in the trauma bay that was no longer a trauma bay in the quiet aftermath of an hour that had reordered everything about how this hospital would see her, and she looked at Ranger. Ranger looked at her. She sat down on the edge of the nearest chair. The dog Rose crossed the 3 feet between them without any drama at all and settled against her left leg. His warmth was immediate and solid. She put her hand on his back without thinking about it, the way you reach for something that has always been there. She had come to this city to disappear, to build something small and quiet and survivable from the rubble of the things she used to be. She had calculated the distance carefully from the places she had been, the things she had done, the people who had known her when she was a different kind of person, with a different kind of title and a different kind of weight on her shoulders. She had thought she had more time before the world caught up. Ranger exhaled slowly through his nose. Outside the trauma bay, the floor continued, its noise monitors and voices and the rolling wheels of equipment, carts in the specific rhythm of a place that never stops, that has no quiet hours, that measures its time and people brought in and people stabilized and people sent home. Her pager went off. She looked at it. Overflow beds. There was a patient in overflow who needed reassessment. She stood up. Ranger looked at her. She looked at him. Stay, she said quietly, and the dog settled back down against the base of the chair. She walked out of the trauma bay and back onto the floor. And 3 nurses tracked her passage without appearing to the way people track something they are not yet ready to name, but cannot stop watching. Because something had changed on this floor tonight. Everyone could feel it. Nobody was quite ready to say it out loud. But it was already true, the way things are true before they are spoken. Emily Carter was not who her file said she was. And Seaside Regional Hospital was not going to be the same place it was at the beginning of this shift. She checked her pager again, moved toward overflow. Behind her in the trauma bay, Ranger's ears tilted once in her direction. The overflow patient was a 63-year-old man named Gerald Potts, who had come in complaining of chest tightness and had been waiting for 40 minutes in a curtained bed while the floor handled the general's arrival. He was sitting up with his arms crossed over his chest and the particular expression of a man who has decided that being ignored is a personal insult. And when Emily pulled back the curtain and introduced herself, he looked at her badge and said, "You're an intake nurse. I asked for a real doctor 20 minutes ago." "You've got me right now," Emily said, already reaching for his wrist to check his pulse. "Tell me when it started." "When what started?" "The tightness." He watched her fingers on his wrist. Something in his resistance softened slightly, not because he'd decided to trust her, but because her hands were already working, and there was something reassuring about someone who didn't wait for permission to help. "About 3 hours ago, I thought it was heartburn. Rate the pressure on a scale of 1 to 10. 6, maybe 7. Does it move into your arm, your jaw, your back?" He blinked. "My left shoulder, a little." Emily's expression didn't change. Her voice didn't change. But her next question came fractionally faster. "Any history of cardiac events?" "My father had a heart attack at 68. "Any current medications, blood pressure, and cholesterol?" She was already moving. She pulled the curtain fully open, stepped to the nurse's station outside the bay, and said, "I need a 12-lead EKG on the patient in overflow 3, now, and get Dr. Caldwell or whoever is covering cardio on the floor." The nurse at the station, a young man named Terrence, who was technically senior to Emily by 2 years of placement, looked at her with the reflexive skepticism of someone who has been on a floor long enough to have opinions about who gives direction. "He's a chest tightness intake. He's in the queue, left shoulder radiation, family history, currently on antihypertensives." Emily met his eyes. "If you want to wait for the queue, that's your call, but put it in the chart that you made it." Terrence had the EKG machine moving within 90 seconds. She went back to Gerald Potts. He was watching her with different eyes, now still wary, but with the wariness pointed in a new direction. Not at her competence, at what her competence might mean about what was happening to him. "Am I having a heart attack?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's what we're going to find out." That's not very reassuring. No, she agreed, but it's honest, and right now, honest is more useful than reassuring. She checked his blood pressure by manually, and the number she got made her call out to Terrence again before she'd even finished taking her hand away. And I need a cardiac enzyme panel. Add troponin. Gerald Potts gripped the bed rail with both hands and looked at the ceiling. I told my wife it was heartburn, he said. She wanted me to come in 4 hours ago. I told her she was overreacting. You came in, Emily said. That's what matters. She's going to say I told you so for the rest of our marriage. Then you'll have a marriage, Emily said. That seems like the better outcome. He laughed despite himself, a short, surprised sound, and some of the tension went out of his shoulders, which was also medically useful. The EKG results came back in 7 minutes. Emily read them before the attending cardiologist, Dr. Miriam Osei, arrived, and what she saw in those lines confirmed what she had suspected from the moment Gerald Potts told her about his left shoulder. She handed the printout to Dr. Osei the moment she came through the curtain with the relevant segment already marked. Dr. Osei looked at it. She was a compact, precise woman in her early 50s who had the focused energy of someone who never stopped thinking, even when she appeared to be standing still. She read the EKG, looked at the chart Emily had started, and then looked at Emily. You flagged this from intake, she said. Yes. On a chest tightness complaint with a 6 out of 10 pain rating. 7, Gerald said from the bed. I said maybe 7. Dr. Osei looked at him, back at Emily. Who are you? Emily was beginning to get tired of that question. Carter, intake nurse. She's being modest, Gerald said with the confidence of a man who had decided in the last 10 minutes that Emily Carter was his personal champion. She spotted it in about 4 minutes, maybe 3. Dr. Osei said nothing further. She examined her patient with the full focused attention of an experienced cardiologist, asked her own questions, reviewed the enzyme panel that came back while she was still in the curtain bay. Troponin elevated, confirming what the EKG had suggested, and ordered. Gerald Potts transferred to the cardiac unit with a speed that told Emily she had read the situation correctly. As the transport team moved in, Dr. Osei paused beside Emily at the curtain. That catch was not a new graduate instinct, she said quietly. Not accusatory, almost clinical in its observation the way a scientist notes an anomaly. I had good training, Emily said. Dr. Osei studied her for exactly 1 second. Then she nodded once and went with her patient. Gerald Potts grabbed Emily's hand as the transport team moved him out. He held it for one strong, brief moment. Thank you, he said, and I'm going to go ahead and tell my wife you agree with her. Tell her whatever you need to, Emily said. He went. The curtain swung closed on an empty bay. Emily stood in the quiet for exactly 3 seconds before her pager went off again. She went back to the floor. The next 2 hours moved the way ER hours move when the floor is running hot, not in a straight line, but in the overlapping, layered rhythm of simultaneous events that each demand full attention and none of which wait for the others to resolve. Emily worked through it with the same quality of focused efficiency that she had shown from the moment she'd walked in, and the floor noticed, and the floor began to adjust itself around her, the way water adjusts around a stone, not dramatically, not with announcement, just inevitably. It was Terrence who broke first. He appeared at her side somewhere around the 2-hour mark, with a chart in his hand and a look on his face that was working very hard to be neutral. I need a second read on this vitals pattern, he said, for the patient in bay 7. Emily took the chart. She read it. She asked 2 questions. She gave him her assessment in 4 sentences and handed it back. He stood there a moment after taking it, not quite moving on. That thing you said earlier, he said, about putting it in the chart, that was a little cold. It was accurate, she said. Still, she looked at him properly. He was 28, maybe 29, with the slightly defensive posture of someone who was good at his job and wasn't used to being moved out of the way. I wasn't trying to embarrass you, she said. I needed the machine and I needed it fast. I didn't have time to negotiate. You could have asked. Could I have... She said it without edge, just a question. You looked at me like I was giving you a suggestion. I needed you to understand it was a direction. He was quiet for a moment, then, how did you know from that description alone? The shoulder radiation, she said, and his hands. He had his arms crossed over his chest the way people do when something in there feels wrong, but they don't want to admit how wrong. Terrence looked at the chart in his hands. I walked past him twice, he said. You were busy. You were busier. You'd just come out of trauma bay 1. Yes, she said. And that was all she said because the pager went off again and they both moved. It was Dr. Caldwell who found her next. She was in the hallway outside the surgical suite waiting area, updating a chart on a tablet, when he appeared around the corner with his hands in his coat pockets in the particular energy of a man who has been thinking about something for a while and has decided to stop thinking and start doing. He stopped a few feet away. She kept charting. He waited 2 seconds, which was Emily was learning, close to his patience limit, and then he said, "The general surgery is going well." "Good," she said and turned a page on the tablet. They found the second fragment. It was closer to the pleural lining than the imaging suggested. Another hour and it would have moved. She stopped charting. She looked up. "Your 40-minute timeline was tight," he said. "Not because you were wrong, because it was actually tighter than 40 minutes. You were, roughly speaking, correct in your urgency assessment." Emily looked at him for a moment. "You came to tell me that?" "I came to," he stopped, restarted. "I came to tell you that the surgical team lead asked who had made the initial field assessment. I told him it was collaborative." "Was it?" His jaw moved. "I told him it was collaborative," he repeated, which was its own kind of answer. She went back to the chart. "Thank you for the update on the general." Caldwell didn't leave. She could feel him still standing there, that specific weight of a person who has more to say and hasn't figured out the angle. She kept charting and waited. "Osei called me," he said. She kept her eyes on the tablet. "About the patient you flagged in overflow. She said the troponin came back at a level that suggested the event was already in early progression, that if it had waited another hour in the queue." "But it didn't," Emily said. "No, it didn't." He was quiet. Then, 2 critical interventions in 2 hours, one of which required a classified military command that you should not know and did not explain, and a cardiac catch that a 4-year floor nurse might have missed. He paused. "I don't know what to do with you." Emily set the tablet down. She looked at him straight, no deflection, no careful management. "Do you need to do something with me right now?" "No," he said, "but I will. Eventually this requires an explanation," she said. "I know, and I'll give it to you when the time is right." She held his gaze. "Right now I have 4 more patients to assess and a chart to close. Is that all right with you, Dr. Caldwell?" The thing that moved across his face in that moment was not comfortable for him. She could see that. She wasn't trying to make it comfortable. She was just being precise. "Yes," he said. "That's all right." He left. Emily picked up the tablet and went back to work. The shift was 3 hours old when everything changed again. Linda Marsh came onto the floor from the direction of the administrative corridor with a face that Emily recognized immediately, not from 11 years of watching Linda, but from a lifetime of reading faces in high-stakes environments. That face meant something external had entered the building, something that had not been on the schedule and was not going to behave like something on the schedule. She was right. 2 men in civilian clothes came through the main entrance 40 seconds behind Linda, and everything about them communicated federal without requiring them to announce it. The way they moved slightly staggered, covering angles without appearing to. The way their eyes went to the room before they went to any person in it. The earpieces. The specific controlled stillness when they stopped. They asked for Emily Carter by name. Terrence, who was at the desk and heard it, looked immediately toward the hallway where Emily was working. His face did the thing that faces do when something confirms a suspicion you almost wish you hadn't had. Linda came and found Emily herself. She came quickly, which was another signal. "There are 2 people at the front desk asking for you," she said, voice completely levelized, doing the opposite. "They have federal identification. They're not saying more than that." Emily closed the chart she was working on, set the tablet down precisely. Her face did not change. "Okay," she said. "Do you know what this is about?" Emily looked at her, and in that look, Linda saw something she hadn't seen on Emily Carter's face all night. Not fear, not panic, but the particular look of a person who has been waiting for a door to open and isn't entirely surprised that it finally has. "I have an idea," Emily said. "Should I call someone legal or older?" "No," Emily said. "It's all right. She stopped, decided. "It's fine. I'll handle it." She walked to the front desk. The taller of the 2 men spoke first. He had the flat, measured speech of someone trained to give information without giving anything additional along with it. "Emily Carter." "Yes." We're here regarding General Thomas Harkins. We understand he's currently in surgery at this facility. He paused. We've been asked to speak with the individual who made the initial medical intervention this evening. That was a team effort, Emily said. The same thing Caldwell had said, for different reasons. We're aware of the team, he said. We're specifically here for you. The second man hadn't spoken. He was watching her with a different quality of attention, not the assessment of a federal agent interviewing a subject, but something else, something more personal. Emily looked at him more carefully, and what she saw made something go very still in her chest. She knew his face, not from this city, not from this hospital, not from anything in the last 18 months of her rebuilt and carefully managed life. She knew it from a specific compound, a specific season, a specific moment when the difference between one decision and another had determined whether certain people lived or didn't. He saw her recognize him, and something in his expression moved carefully controlled but there. "Hello, Carter," he said. Her voice when it came was perfectly even. "Reyes." The lobby of Seaside Regional Hospital was not equipped for the weight of that single exchange. Nobody around them knew what had just passed between those two people. But Priya, who had followed from a distance when she saw Emily head for the lobby, because Priya was already 3 hours into knowing Emily, Carter, constitutionally incapable of not knowing what was happening to her, felt the shift in the air from 15 feet away and understood without understanding the specifics that she was watching something significant. Agent Reyes, because that was clearly what he was now. The uniform of his current life sitting over him, like a second skin, said, "We need to speak with you privately." "About what specifically?" Emily said. "About General Harkins, about this evening's events, and, He paused, and in the pause was everything. "About your status." "My status," she said, and the word was flat and careful. "Your file was flagged the moment your name came up in connection with the General's case. There are people who have been looking for you, Carter. Not officially, but looking." His voice was lower now, more careful, more human. "I made sure I was the one who came." Emily looked at him. For a long moment, she just looked at him, this man from a chapter of her life that she had closed and locked and built a new life on top of. "Why?" "Because some of the people looking don't have good intentions," he said. "And I thought you deserved to know that before they found you." The lobby was full of the ordinary sounds of a hospital at night. Somewhere a television murmured. Somewhere a child was crying. The automatic doors opened and closed as someone came in from outside bringing a brief wash of cold air that touched the backs of everyone's hands. Emily Carter, who had come to the city to disappear, who had built a small, careful, survivable life on the premise that no one would find her here, stood in the entrance of Seaside Regional Hospital and understood that the premise had just expired. "How long do I have?" she said. Reyes looked at his colleague. The other man took 2 steps away, the professional courtesy of distance. "Before the people who aren't me," Reyes said. "Maybe 72 hours. Could be less. Because of tonight." "Because of tonight," he confirmed, using that phrase. A classified operational code in a hospital with cameras, with witnesses, with documentation. It was going to surface. It was always going to surface if you used it. "I used it because the alternative was worse." "I know that," he said. "I'm not here to argue about the choice. I'm here because of the consequence." He looked at her directly. "You need to decide what you want to do." "What are my options?" He was quiet for a moment. When he answered, it was with the care of someone who has thought about this very hard and is not certain any of the answers are good ones. "You come back in, voluntary re-engagement. The discharge gets reviewed, your file gets reclassified, and you operate under a different kind of protection." He paused. "Or you stay here, and we do what we can to manage the exposure. But managing is not the same as eliminating." Emily was quiet. The automatic doors opened again. A family came in, a woman with 2 teenagers. The look of controlled fear that means someone they love is inside this building. They went to the reception desk, and the world kept moving around Emily Carter and Agent Reyes and the weight of what sat between them. "There's a third option," Emily said. He waited. "I stay here," she said, "and whoever is looking finds exactly what they find. A nurse who did her job, who used an old code phrase she learned a long time ago, whose discharge paperwork is clean, and whose nursing license is current, and whose entire documented life for the last 18 months is exactly what it appears to be." She met his eyes. That's a story too, Reyes, and it's a true one. He looked at her for a long time. It's not the whole story. No story is the whole story, she said. You know that better than anyone. From across the lobby, Linda Marsh was watching, not pretending not to watch, just watching openly with the frank attention of a woman who had been running a floor for 11 years and had learned that some situations require you to simply bear witness. Rhea said quietly, "They won't accept that story if they don't want to." "Then I'll deal with that when it happens," Emily said. "But I'm not running again." Something shifted in Reyes' expression. Not agreement, he wasn't in a position to agree, but something that might have been underneath everything admiration. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she said. He nodded slowly, reached into his jacket, produced a card standard issue, nothing printed on it except a number. He held it out. "When it gets complicated, and it will get complicated, use this." She took it, looked at it, put it in her scrubs pocket. "It was good work tonight," Rhea said. "What you did in there." "I'm a nurse," she said. "It's what nurses do." He almost smiled. Almost. He looked at her for one last moment, long enough to say without saying it that he understood what she was choosing and why, and that he would carry that knowledge carefully. Then he turned, rejoined his colleague, and they walked out through the automatic doors into the night. Emily stood still for exactly 4 seconds. Then she turned around and found Priya standing 10 feet away with her arms crossed and her eyes wide. "Who," Priya said, "was that?" "Someone I used to know," Emily said, "from before the 6-year gap." "Yes." Priya absorbed this, her arms tightened across her chest. "Are you in trouble?" Emily thought about the card in her pocket, about Reyes's face when he said 72 hours, about General Harkins in a surgical suite 2 floors up, and Ranger waiting in an empty trauma bay, and Linda Marsh across the lobby, watching all of it without blinking. "Not yet," she said, "but possibly." "Possibly," she agreed. Priya looked at her for a long moment. Then she uncrossed her arms and said, "Okay, Bay 9 needs a reassessment, and Bay 12 has a patient whose IV has been beeping for 10 minutes because nobody has gotten there yet." Emily looked at her. "We'll deal with possibly later," Priya said. "Right now we have a floor to run." She turned and walked back toward the ward. After a moment, Emily followed. Linda Marsh watched them go. She stood alone in the lobby for a moment, this woman who had seen 11 years of what people were made of when the pressure got applied, and she looked at the doors where the federal agents had exited, and she looked at the hallway where Emily Carter had just disappeared back into her work. Then she went after them, because the floor wasn't going to run itself. And because whatever was coming, and something was coming, she was certain of it, had been certain of it, from the moment she watched Emily Carter walk toward a combat-trained dog that was prepared to take someone's arm off. It was not coming tonight. Tonight they had patience. Tonight they had work to do. The surgery took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Emily knew this because she tracked it the way she tracked everything on the shift, not obsessively, not with the kind of visible anxiety that announces itself, but with the quiet peripheral awareness of someone who has learned that knowing where all the threads are is the difference between managing a situation and being managed by it. She had 3 patients in rotation, a medication reconciliation to complete, and a conversation with Linda about her resubmitted paperwork that kept getting postponed by the floor's refusal to slow down. She did all of it, and she kept one part of her attention the whole time on the surgical suite board. At 2:14 in the morning, the board updated. General Harkins was out of surgery, stable, recovery unit 4th floor. She was in the middle of changing a dressing when the board updated, and she finished the dressing before she reacted because the patient in front of her was there, and the general was stable, and the order of those priorities was not complicated. When she was done, she stripped her gloves, updated the chart, and stood in the hallway for exactly 5 seconds with her eyes closed. Then Priya appeared at her elbow. "He made it through." "He made it through," Emily said. "You okay?" "Yes." Priya looked at her with the frank, quiet attention she'd been giving Emily for the last several hours, the attention of someone who has decided to simply be present for a person they don't fully understand yet, but have already decided to stand beside. You don't have to keep saying yes like it's the only acceptable answer. Emily opened her eyes and looked at her. "I know. Is that a different yes or the same one?" Despite everything, something almost lifted in Emily's face. "A slightly different one." "Good enough," Priya said. Linda wants you. Conference room B. She said 5 minutes ago, which means now. Emily went. Linda was in the conference room with two people Emily didn't recognize, and one she did. Dr. Caldwell sat at the far end of the table with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who has been in a meeting for longer than he wanted and has not yet gotten what he came for. The two strangers were a man and a woman. Hospital administration. Emily read immediately from their posture and their clothing and the specific way they arranged their hands on the table in front of them. People who were accustomed to sitting on the right side of institutional decisions. The woman spoke first. Her name badge read Karen Ellison, Director of Nursing Operations. Ms. Carter, please sit down. Emily sat. We've been reviewing the events of this evening, Ellison said. The interaction with the K9, the trauma assessment on General Harkins, the cardiac flag in overflow. She paused. You've had quite a first shift. It was a busy floor, Emily said. The man beside Ellison, his badge read David Park Hospital. Administrator leaned forward slightly. We've also had a report that two federal agents came to this facility tonight and requested to speak with you specifically. Can you tell us about that? Emily looked at him. They came in connection with General Harkins's case. I spoke with them briefly. It was resolved. Resolved, Park said. Can you be more specific? I'd rather not at this stage. The room was very quiet for a moment. Caldwell's arms stayed crossed. Linda was watching Emily with that familiar weather map attention reading something. Ms. Carter, Ellison said, and her voice had a different quality now, not harder exactly, but more precise, like someone shifting from a general conversation to the specific one they actually came to have. Your employment file as submitted lists no prior clinical experience outside of your nursing program. However, what we observed tonight, what multiple staff members have reported, suggests a level of clinical competency that is inconsistent with that profile. She paused. We have a responsibility to understand who is treating patients in this facility. That's reasonable, Emily said. So you understand why we need full disclosure of your prior experience. Any medical training, any clinical work, in any context. Emily looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at Ellison and then at Park and then briefly at Caldwell. Caldwell's eyes were on her with an intensity that was not hostile. It was the attention of someone who had spent the evening recalibrating and wanted the information that would let him finish the job. I served as a combat medic, Emily said, attached to special operations units, 3 deployments. My operational work included trauma care, under field conditions, surgical support in forward deployed medical units, and medical oversight for K9 working units. She kept her voice level and factual. None of that experience appears on my nursing file because the nature of the work made it difficult to document in standard civilian terms. Some of it cannot be documented at all. Ellison and Park exchanged a look. Park said, the discharge from military service was honorable, Emily said. You can verify that. We intend to, he said, not unkindly. We also intend to speak with the Department of Veterans Affairs about the possibility of having your military medical experience formally recognized within our credentialing system. He paused. That's not a disciplinary process. That's an effort to align your actual qualifications with your current placement. Emily looked at him more carefully. That was not what she had been expecting. She had been expecting the institutional machinery, the defensive covering itself machinery, that hospitals deploy when something unusual has happened, and they need to contain the unusual thing before it becomes a liability. She had not been expecting this. You're not asking me to leave, she said. No, Ellison said. We're asking you to let us put you where you actually belong. She folded her hands, which is not with respect intake. The room settled around that statement. Outside the conference room, the floor continued, voices, equipment, the pager system's flat electronic tone. The hospital went on being a hospital, indifferent to the conversation happening inside its walls. Caldwell uncrossed his arms. It was the first time he'd moved since Emily sat down. He put both hands flat on the table and looked at her with the full direct attention that he normally reserved for imaging results and surgical assessments, the attention he gave to things that required his actual judgment. I want to say something, he said. Nobody stopped him. I was wrong tonight, he said, not about the medicine, about you. I made assumptions based on a file that didn't match what was in front of me, and I let those assumptions make me obstructionist at a moment when obstruction cost time that the general didn't have. He was not comfortable saying this. It was visible in every line of his body. But he was saying it anyway, and the fact that he was saying it told Emily something about who Ethan Caldwell actually was underneath the professional architecture he'd built around himself. What you did in that room with the assessment, with the sedation protocol, that was not luck, and it was not beginner's instinct. That was expertise, and I should have recognized it faster. The room was silent. I'm not good at this, he added, which was clearly true and clearly an understatement, and somehow made the whole speech more real. Emily looked at him for a long moment. You adjusted the sedation order, she said. When you could have overridden it on authority and been wrong, you made the right call. I made it slow. You made it, she said. That's what counts in the moment. Something in Caldwell's jaw unclenched by a fraction. It wasn't absolution, and Emily wasn't offering it as absolution. She was just being accurate, which was the only currency she knew how to trade in. Park cleared his throat. There's one more thing we need to discuss tonight. He opened the folder in front of him. Emily watched his hands and waited. The federal agents who came in earlier, they spoke to hospital security before they left. Apparently, they flagged a concern. They described it as a precautionary notification about Ms. Carter's visibility in this case. What kind of concern? Linda said. It was the first time she'd spoken in the meeting, and the flatness of her voice made it very clear that she had been waiting for this specific moment. They indicated that certain parties unspecified might become aware of Ms. Carter's involvement with the general's case through media or internal military communication channels. Park paused. They recommended that we take steps to limit her public profile in relation to this case. No press statements that include her name, no documentation in publicly accessible records that connects her to General Harkins specifically. Why call you? Caldwell said. Park looked at him. They weren't specific. They never are, Emily said quietly. Everyone looked at her. It's all right, she said. I understand what they're asking. I don't have a problem with it. I do, Linda said, and her voice had that quality again. The flat certainty, the absolute immovability. I have a problem with federal agents walking into my hospital and telling me how to manage my staff's documentation. I have a problem with the implication that one of my nurses needs to be hidden for reasons that nobody will explain clearly. She looked at Emily directly. Are you in danger? The question sat in the center of the table. Honest, direct, the way Linda did everything. Emily considered it with the same honesty she'd been meeting Linda with all night. I don't know, she said. Probably not immediately. There are people in the system I used to work in who would prefer that I not be visible. Not because of anything I did wrong, because of what I know. She paused. And because of what happened to me. What happened to you, Ellison said, and it wasn't quite a question. There was an operation, Emily said slowly, choosing each word the way you choose footing on uncertain ground. In my last deployment, it went wrong, not because of any failure in the field, because of decisions made higher up before we ever got there. People at my level took the consequences of those decisions. I was one of them. She looked at her hands. My discharge was honorable because the discharge paperwork was correct. What led to it was not. The silence that followed was the kind that comes when a room full of people simultaneously understands that they have just been told the true shape of something they could only see the outline of before. Park closed his folder. He did it slowly, like someone who needs a physical action to help them think. And these federal agents, are they? Reyes is someone I trust, Emily said. Whatever his official reason for being here tonight, he came because he wanted me to have warning. That tells me something about the situation. She looked up. It tells me the situation is real. But it also tells me it's manageable, if I'm careful. Careful, Linda said. Yes. And continuing to work here falls under careful. I think so, Emily said. Running would do more damage than staying. The moment I move, I become a story. If I stay, I'm a nurse who had a remarkable first shift and then went back to work. That's not a story anyone needs to chase. Linda looked at her for a long time. Then she looked at Park and Ellison. Something passed between the three of them, the kind of communication that doesn't need words when everyone in the room has enough experience to read the shorthand. All right, Park said. We proceed with the credentialing review. We keep Ms. Carter's name out of any public-facing documentation related to the general's case. And he looked at Emily. We revisit this conversation in 72 hours when we have more information. 72 hours, the same number Reyes had given her. That works, Emily said. The meeting ended. People gathered their things and moved. Caldwell was the last to stand and he paused beside Emily's chair on his way out. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm glad you were standing in that doorway tonight. She looked up at him. So am I, she said. He nodded once and left. Linda waited until the room was empty, except for the two of them. Then she sat back down across from Emily in the conference room that smelled like stale coffee and recycled air, and she looked at the woman across the table from her with the full weight of 11 years of learning how to read people in the worst moments of their lives. How are you? She said. Not the managerial version, the actual version. Emily was quiet for a moment. Tired, she said. That's honest. You said honest was more useful than reassuring. Linda almost smiled. I said that. I said it, but you agreed. I probably did. Linda folded her hands on the table. What do you actually need right now, not professionally, as a person? Emily thought about it, the genuine version of thinking about it, not the managed version. To know that this is a place I can stay, she said. That's what I need. To know that what happened tonight doesn't make this. She gestured a small motion that encompassed the hospital, the floor, the last several hours. Impossible. It doesn't, Linda said without hesitation. You can't know that yet. I can know it as well as anyone knows anything in the first hours after the thing that changes everything, Linda said, which is not perfectly, but well enough. She stood up. You have 2 more hours on your shift. I need you on Bay 5. It's a post-op patient who came down from cardiac earlier, and I want your eyes on him. Emily stood up too. Cardiac. Routine bypass 3 days ago. He's been stable, but his overnight numbers are making me want a second read. I'll go now, Emily said. Good, Linda said. And that was the end of the conversation that had been one of the most important conversations of Emily Carter's life, because Linda Marsh conducted important conversations the same way she conducted everything efficiently, without ceremony, and then immediately back to work. The post-op patient in Bay 5 was named Walter Nguyen. 71 years old, retired high school history teacher, bypass surgery 72 hours ago, currently being monitored for a slightly elevated heart rate that his overnight team had logged but not escalated. Emily read his chart at the door and then went in and introduced herself and sat down beside his bed and talked to him for 4 minutes before she looked at a single monitor. Walter Nguyen, it turned out, had not slept properly in 3 days. Not because of pain, the pain management was adequate, but because every time he closed his eyes in this hospital, he heard the sounds of the place, and his body refused to believe it was safe to go unconscious. He had spent 3 days in a state of low-level vigilance that was quietly but steadily elevating his heart rate and suppressing the recovery process his body was trying to run. Nobody asked me that, he said when Emily had gotten far enough into the conversation to understand what was happening. They asked me about pain. They asked me about my breathing. Nobody asked me if I was sleeping. Are you sleeping at home before the surgery? Like a rock, he said. Always have. My wife says I could sleep through a brass band. Then this is situational, Emily said. Your body is not trusting the environment enough to rest. He looked at her with the careful weighing attention of a man who has spent decades evaluating whether the person in front of him actually knows what they're talking about. Can you fix that? I can help with it, she said. We'll adjust the monitor alert thresholds so there are fewer sounds interrupting the room. I'm going to ask about getting you a private bay for overnight if one's available. And I want to talk to your day team about a mild sleep support medication, just enough to help your body understand it's allowed to stand down. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're the first person who's walked in here tonight who looked at me instead of the screen first. Emily looked at him. You're the one who's sick, she said. The screen just reports it. Walter Nguyen leaned back against his pillow. Something in his face eased, not completely, not the ease of genuine rest, but the first movement toward it. All right, he said, I'll try. She spent 20 minutes arranging what she'd promised him. The bay adjustments, the consult request for the day team, the conversation with the overnight attending about the sleep support order. The attending, a thin, tired man named Dr. Frazier, who was 3 hours from the end of a 12-hour shift, looked at her proposal, looked at the chart, and said, That's actually a good catch. Thank you, Emily said. You're the intake nurse, right? From the K9 situation? She kept her face neutral. I'm the night shift nurse on Bay 5 right now. He accepted that. People who are very tired accept things efficiently. He signed the order and moved on. She was charting outside Walter Nguyen's bay when her phone buzzed. Not the pager, her personal phone, which she kept in her scrubs pocket on silent during shifts. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. But the prefix was one she recognized. She stepped into the stairwell. "Carter," she answered. "It's me, Reyes." His voice was different from the lobby, tighter, lower, stripped of the performance of neutrality. "I need you to listen without reacting." She pressed her back against the stairwell wall. "Go." The flag on your file moved faster than I expected. Somebody in the chain got alerted the moment the general's case went into the system with your name attached. I managed the initial notification, but there's a secondary review process I can't intercept. He paused. "Someone is asking questions about your discharge. Not the fact of it, the reason for it." Her chest tightened, not with fear, with the specific cold recognition of a threat becoming concrete. "Which someone?" "I don't have a name yet. I have a position. Someone in the Inspector General's office. Military side." He said it carefully, the way you say something that has more weight than the words themselves suggest. Emily understood immediately. The Inspector General's office. Military side. The people who handled, among other things, the aftermath of operations that went wrong. The people who decided after the fact, who bore responsibility for decisions made before the fact. "They're reopening the review," she said. "I don't know that. I know someone is pulling the file." "That's the same thing." Silence on the line for a moment. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not. Carter, I need to know. Is there anything in your conduct in that operation that they could use? Anything that wasn't in the original report?" "No," she said, immediately, flatly. "You're certain?" "I'm certain," she said. "What wasn't in the original report wasn't mine. You know that. You were there." Another pause. Longer this time. "Yes," he said. "I know that." "Then the question is whether someone is trying to make it mine," she said. "And the answer to that question is the same as it was 3 years ago. I will not let them." Reyes exhaled through his nose. She could hear it clearly in the quiet of the stairwell. "I'm going to keep watching the file. If the review formalizes, I'll reach out again immediately." "Okay, Carter." He stopped. Restarted. "You handled tonight well, the situation with the general, the way you managed the hospital administration." "All of it." He paused. "You always did handle things well." She looked at the stairwell door. Beyond it, the floor continued. Monitors and voices and the work that didn't stop because personal history was complicated. "It gets easier," she said, "when you remember why you're doing it." She hung up. She stood in the stairwell for 30 seconds, just breathing. The way she had breathed in the trauma bay, standing 7 feet from a dog that was ready to make a decision about her, choosing the pace of her own reaction, choosing what to do with the information she had in the time she had to work with. Then she pushed the door open and went back onto the floor. Priya was at the nurse's station and looked up the moment Emily appeared. One look at Emily's face and she straightened. "What happened?" "Nothing I can't manage," Emily said. "That is the 3rd time tonight you've said a version of that sentence." "Because it's been true all 3 times," Emily said. She picked up the chart for Bay 6. "What's the status on the patient in Bay 6? Priya watched her for a moment. The way she had been watching her all night, steady, present, already decided. "Stable," she said. "Dr. Frazier updated the notes 20 minutes ago." "Good," Emily said. "Emily." She stopped. Priya almost never used her first name. The use of it now had a different weight. "Whatever it is," Priya said, "you're not handling it alone." "Okay, I'm not asking your permission. That's just a statement of fact." Emily looked at her. This woman she had known for less than a single shift. This person who had been on her side since the first hour for no other reason than that she had watched Emily work and made a decision about who Emily was based on what she saw rather than what was written anywhere. "You don't know what you're signing up for," Emily said. "I know enough," Priya said. "I know that you walked toward a dog that was going to take someone's face off because you were the only person in the room who knew how to stop it. I know that you caught a heart attack that was 40 minutes from becoming something irreversible. I know that you sat with Walter Nguyen and actually looked at him." She paused. "Whatever else there is, I know that much. And that much is enough." Emily was quiet. The floor moved around them. The ordinary, extraordinary work of people taking care of other people in the worst moments of their lives continued in every direction. "Okay," Emily said. "Okay," Priya said, and picked up the next chart. At 4:47 in the morning, General Thomas Harkins was moved from recovery to a private room on the 4th floor. Emily found out through the board update the same way she'd found out he was out of surgery. She was finishing her last chart of the shift when she saw it, and she stopped charting for a moment and let herself feel what she'd been managing at arm's length for the last several hours, the relief. Clean and uncomplicated. The man was alive. He was in a room instead of a surgical suite. His dog was presumably still waiting somewhere in this building with the specific patience of an animal that has been trained to wait for exactly as long as it takes. She finished the chart. At 5:15, Linda found her at the medication station at the tail end of a shift reconciliation. "The general is awake," Linda said. "He's asking for you." Emily set down the medication log. "He's supposed to be resting." "He is resting. He's also awake and asking for you, which, from what I understand of the man, is completely consistent." Linda paused. "You have 15 minutes before your shift ends. I suggest you use them." Emily went to the fourth floor. She found his room by the presence of Ranger outside it, sitting against the wall in the hallway, with the quiet authority of an animal that has claimed a post and intends to hold it. A hospital orderly was standing a careful 6 feet away, watching the dog with the expression of someone who has been told the dog is safe and has not fully committed to believing it. Ranger saw Emily coming from the end of the hallway. His ears came forward. His tail moved once, not the exuberant wag of a civilian pet, but the controlled, precise acknowledgement of a working dog greeting someone it has placed in its trust category. Emily stopped in front of him. He put his nose against her hand. She let him. "He's been like that all night," the orderly said. "Won't let anyone pass the door except the surgical staff." "He's doing his job," Emily said. She straightened and pushed the door open. The general was awake, propped up against the inclined bed IV in his right arm, the particular pallor of a man who has lost significant blood and is in the early stages of getting it back. But his eyes were clear and immediate, the way they had been in the trauma bay, and when Emily walked in, he looked at her with the full focused attention she had come to understand was simply how this man existed in the world. He did not operate at half capacity. "You stayed through the whole shift," he said. "It's my job." "Sit down," he said. She sat in the chair beside the bed. Outside the door, Ranger was a warm, steady presence that both of them could feel through the wall. "I made some calls," Harkin said. "From recovery. Don't look at me like that. They gave me my phone." "You should have been sleeping." "I'll sleep in a minute." He looked at her steadily. "I called someone in the Inspector General's office." Emily went very still. "His name is Morrison. He's been a friend for 20 years. I told him that any review of your discharge file goes through me first." He paused. He wasn't happy about it, but he agreed. Emily looked at him. The relief that moved through her was so sudden and complete that she had to wait a moment before she could speak. "You didn't have to do that." "You saved my life," he said. "Twice, if you count not letting them take Ranger out of that room, because I would not have survived the surgery without knowing he was close." His voice was quiet but absolute. "So yes, I did have to." "General." "Tom," he said. "You've earned it." She was quiet for a moment. "Tom, the review isn't going away entirely. Someone wants it to happen, and I can delay it but not eliminate it." He looked at her directly. "But I can make sure it's done correctly, by people who are interested in the truth." "That's all I ever needed," she said. "I know," he said. "I've read the original report, all of it, including the parts that weren't in the version that got circulated." He paused, and the pause was full of the weight of what he was saying and what it meant that he had access to those parts. "You were not responsible for what happened, not in any reading of the facts that a reasonable person could make." Emily's hands were in her lap. She looked at them. 3 years, she said, carrying that. "I know." His voice was different now, slower, the edges of exhaustion beginning to show through the steel. "I'm sorry it took this long." She looked up. "You didn't owe me anything before tonight." "No," he said, "but I owe you a great deal now, and I pay my debts." The monitor above his bed beeped steadily. Outside, the hospital was beginning the slow, particular shift that happens in the last hour before morning. The quality of the air changing the sounds, changing the sense of the night, loosening its grip on everything inside these walls. "You need to sleep," Emily said. "Give me one more minute," he said. "And then, are you going to stay at this hospital?" She thought about the conference room, about Ellison and Park in the credentialing review, about Priya saying whatever else there is, "I know that much, and that much is enough." About Walter Nguyen's face when she sat down and looked at him before she looked at the screen. About Linda Marsh, who had watched everything tonight with steady open eyes and then gone back to running her floor. Yes, she said, I'm going to stay. Harkins settled back against the pillow. Some last tension went out of him. Not the tension of the pain which was still clearly there, but the other kind. The kind that comes from carrying a concern for someone and finally being able to set it down. Good, he said. Emily stood up. She checked his IV line, looked at the monitor with the quick automatic assessment of someone for whom reading those numbers is as natural as breathing, and everything she saw told her the same thing: stable recovering on the right side of what had been a very close call. She moved toward the door. Carter, he said from behind her. She turned. He had his eyes almost closed, the sedation and the exhaustion finally pulling him toward the rest he needed. But his voice was clear. Whatever comes next, he said, you're not carrying it alone. She looked at him. This man she had met 6 hours ago in a trauma bay, surrounded by people who couldn't get close to him. This man whose dog had recognized her. This man who had, in the space of a single night, turned a key in a lock she had spent 3 years keeping sealed. I know, she said. She walked out into the hallway. Ranger looked up at her. She touched the top of his head once, just once, a brief point of contact, a kind of acknowledgement, and walked back toward the elevator. She had 4 minutes left in her shift. She went back down to the floor and used every one of them. The shift ended at 6 in the morning, and Emily Carter did not leave. She handed her charts to the incoming day nurse, a methodical man named Dennis, who accepted the stack with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been receiving night shift handoffs for a decade and had strong opinions about the quality of documentation he inherited. He flipped through Emily's charts, and his flipping slowed, and then he stopped flipping entirely and read 2 full pages before he looked up. These are thorough, he said with the particular tone of someone who had not been expecting thorough. Thank you, Emily said. This level of notation on the post-op in Bay 5, he looked at the chart again. This is attending level documentation. The patient had a situational sleep response affecting his recovery rate, Emily said. I wanted the day team to have the full picture. Dennis looked at her over the chart. You're the intake nurse from last night. I was on intake at the start of the shift, yes. He looked back at the chart. Then he looked at her again in the measured way of someone adding things up. There's a note from Linda Marsh that your placement is under review. There is. Under review, meaning you might not be on intake anymore. That's my understanding. Dennis nodded slowly in the way of a man who has worked enough shifts to know that some nights change the architecture of a floor and some don't, and that this was clearly one of the ones that did. Well, he said, and went back to the charts. Emily went to the locker room. She sat on the bench with her bag in her lap and did not immediately change. She sat and let the silence of an early morning hospital settle around her. Different from the night silence, which was tense and vigilant, this was the silence of a building catching its breath. The specific quiet of 6 in the morning that exists nowhere else on earth, quite the way it exists in a place where people have been fighting for their lives all night and are for the moment still here. She had come to this city 8 months ago with 2 bags and a lease on a studio apartment 3 miles from the hospital and the firm intention of becoming ordinary. Not invisible, she tried invisible, and the problem with invisible was that it required constant maintenance and left nothing over for anything else. Ordinary was different. Ordinary meant doing the work well and going home and cooking something simple and sleeping without the particular vigilance that had kept her operational for 6 years in environments where sleeping without vigilance was a luxury you could not afford. She had almost gotten there, 8 months in, and the vigilance had started finally to cost less. She had started to sleep past 5 without her body pulling her upright in the dark. She had started to know her neighbors' names and the order the coffee shop got her drink without being asked, and the way the evening light came through her apartment window in a way she had not let herself notice for a very long time. And then last night, she was not sorry. She needed to be clear about that with herself sitting on this bench in this locker room with 6 hours of the most complicated shift of her nursing career behind her. She was not sorry she had stepped toward Ranger. She was not sorry she had said the phrase. She was not sorry that Jarrell Potts was in the cardiac unit with elevated troponin being managed instead of a catastrophic event being autopsied, or that Walter Nguyen had, according to the last note she'd seen, slept for 2 uninterrupted hours before the morning team came in. She was not sorry about any of the work. She was just aware sitting here that the ordinary life had a crack in it now, and that through the crack, everything she had been before was visible again. The locker room door opened. Priya came in still in her scrubs, leaning against the row of lockers with her arms crossed, and the look of someone who has made a decision and arrived to announce it. "I talked to Linda," she said. Emily looked at her. "About what?" "About the credentialing review. About what you told administration." She paused. "About what you didn't tell them." "Priya, I didn't tell her anything you didn't already say," Priya said quickly. I wanted her to understand that whatever happens with the review, whatever this Inspector General situation turns into, that you have someone on this floor who is going to say clearly and on the record that what they saw last night was the best nursing they have ever witnessed, from someone on their first shift. Her voice was steady, but her jaw was tight the way it got when she was feeling something she was working to keep controlled. "I wanted that on record somewhere, before things get complicated." Emily looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't have to do that." "I know I didn't have to," Priya said. "That's sort of the point." The quiet between them was the kind that happens after someone has said something true and the other person is still finding the right place to put it. "Thank you," Emily said, and meant it in a way the two words didn't quite cover but were the right ones anyway. Priya nodded, straightened. "Also," she said, "Linda wants you back on the floor at 2 this afternoon. Not intake, she's putting you on trauma response." She paused. "She said to tell you it's not a promotion, it's a correction." Emily processed that. "That's very Linda." "That is extremely Linda, yes." Priya pushed off from the lockers. "Go home. Sleep. Eat something that didn't come from the vending machine." She paused at the door. "And Emily, whatever is coming, the review the people Reyes was talking about, don't try to handle it before it gets here. You'll wear yourself out fighting shadows." She left. Emily sat for another moment. Then she changed and left the building. She did not go home. She went instead to the small diner 2 blocks from the hospital that she had discovered in her first week in the city and had been going to every morning after a night shift because it opened at 5:30 and served coffee that was aggressively mediocre and eggs that were somehow exactly right. She sat in her usual booth by the window and ordered her usual breakfast and drank her coffee and looked out at the street filling with early morning people and let herself be for 20 minutes exactly where she was. Her phone buzzed. "Reyes," she answered it. "Morrison back down," he said, no preamble. His voice had the particular flatness of someone delivering information they did not want to seem too pleased about. The general made a call at 4 in the morning that apparently involved 3 other people who collectively hold enough institutional weight that Morrison decided the review could wait indefinitely. Emily set her coffee down. Indefinitely. That's the word he used. A pause. "It's not permanent, Carter. I want to be accurate with you. The file is still flagged. The questions that existed before last night still exist. But the immediate pressure, the thing I was worried about last night, that's been managed. By General Harkins. By General Harkins and 2 of his colleagues who apparently feel strongly about what the file says and what it doesn't say." Another pause. "He moves fast for a man who was in surgery 4 hours ago." "He told me he pays his debts," Emily said. "He clearly does." Reyes was quiet for a moment. "This doesn't mean you're clear. It means you have time. Time to build the record you need. The work history, the clinical documentation, the paper trail of who Emily Carter is in this new context. That's the protection that sticks." "I understand," she said. "Good." He paused again, and this time the pause had a different texture, less operational, more personal. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes. Last night when I gave you the options, come back in or stay and manage the exposure." He stopped. "You didn't even consider coming back in, not for a second. I watched your face." "No," she said. "I didn't." "Why not?" "It would have been the safer choice." Emily looked out the window. A woman was walking a dog, a small one, nothing like Ranger. Just a small, cheerful animal pulling at its lead in the direction of a smell it found interesting. "Because I already knew what I wanted to go back to," she said. "And it was this, the floor, the patience, the work that is the same work just without the parts that cost too much." She paused. "Going back in would have meant giving this up. And I didn't want to." Reyes was quiet for a moment. "The rookie nurse thing is working for you." She almost laughed. Almost. Apparently. Carter. His voice was quieter now. The voice he'd used last night in the hospital lobby when he'd said I made sure I was the one who came. I'm glad you landed somewhere good. Thank you, Reyes, she said, for last night, for coming yourself. Yeah, he said, and hung up. She finished her eggs. She left a tip that was slightly too large because the woman who brought her coffee had the look of someone who had been on their feet since before 5 and deserved a slightly too large tip. She walked out into the morning. She walked back to the hospital. Not to go inside, her shift didn't start for hours. She walked to the parking structure on the east side where the upper level had a clear line of sight to the city spreading out below it. And she stood there for a while with her hands in her jacket pockets and her face in the early sun that was still low enough to feel like something rather than just light. 6 years in service, 18 months rebuilding, 8 months in this city learning how to be ordinary. One night that had changed the shape of ordinary into something she hadn't been planning for but she was beginning to understand live with. More than live with. She stood there until the cold started to come through her jacket. Then she went home. She set an alarm for noon and lay down in her clothes and was asleep in 4 minutes. She dreamed about nothing, which was the best possible dream. At 12:45, she was back at the hospital. She had eaten, changed, and made the specific internal transition that she had developed over 18 months of nursing shifts, the one that set aside everything that was not the floor, the patients, the work, and brought forward the full weight of her attention. She signed in at the nurse's station with 9 minutes to spare and stood at the edge of the trauma bay in the exact position she had stood in the previous evening, and the floor looked the same and felt entirely different, because they knew her now. Not all of it, not the operational history, or Reyes, or the Inspector General's file, or the 4 words she'd said into General Harkin's ear in the trauma bay. But they knew what mattered. They knew what she looked like when it counted. Dennis was finishing his handoff notes. He looked up when she came in and said with no particular inflection, "Day shift had a good run. Bay 3 is going to need watching 68-year-old post-procedure blood pressure running variable. I flagged it but didn't get a clear read on the pattern." "I'll start there," Emily said. She moved toward Bay 3. She got as far as the hallway junction when she heard a voice she recognized coming from the direction of the elevator bank. Specific, particular, with the cadence and measured weight of a man who had spent 37 years making rooms quiet when he entered them. She turned. General Harkins was in a wheelchair, which was clearly not a situation he had accepted willingly. He was sitting in it with the posture of a man who has decided that if he must be in a wheelchair, then the wheelchair will simply have to accommodate him, and beside him, moving with the precise, unhurried pace of an animal who has decided his work here is not yet finished, was Ranger. The orderly pushing the wheelchair was the same one from the night before, and he had the look of a man who had spent the morning learning to coexist with a 92-pound Belgian Malinois and had reached something approaching peace with the situation. Emily stopped walking. Harkins saw her from 30 feet away, and the same thing happened in his face that happened in Ranger's. A settling, a recognition, the specific relaxation of something that has been looking for a particular thing and has found it. "You came back," he said when she reached them. "I work here," she said. "You, on the other hand, should be on the 4th floor." "I asked to be brought down," he said. "Dr. Caldwell approved it." Emily looked at the orderly. The orderly gave her the expression of a man who has learned when to express opinions and when not to, and this was firmly a when not to situation. "For how long?" she said. 20 minutes, Harkins said. Caldwell said 20 minutes. She looked at him, at the IV still running from his arm to a mobile stand, at the color in his face, which was better than last night, but not where it needed to be. 10, she said. He almost smiled. 15. 12, she said. And then you go back up and you stay there. 12, he agreed with the ease of a man who had intended to negotiate from the beginning and considers 12 an acceptable result. She walked beside the wheelchair as the orderly moved them toward the small waiting area near the trauma bay entrance, the only space on the floor that had enough room for a wheelchair, a nurse, and a combat-trained dog without becoming a navigational problem. Ranger stayed at her left side, not at the general's, at hers. Harkins noticed. He looked at the D, then at Emily with an expression that was the closest thing to warmth she had seen on his face. "He's made his assessment," he said. "He made it last night," she said. "Yes." The general looked at his dog for a moment. "Ranger's never done that before. Transferred his attention to someone outside the unit during an active alert. In 14 years of working with dogs, I have never seen that. He looked at Emily. What did you do? I stood still, she said, and breathed evenly, and gave him the chance to read me. Most people can't do that when a dog like Ranger is preparing to attack. Most people haven't been in situations where panic was more dangerous than the thing causing the panic, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I want to tell you something, he said. She waited. I told you last night I read the full report, the classified version. He held her gaze. I know what happened in that operation. I know the decision that was made at the command level, the one that put your unit in an impossible position. I know that you were the one who held what was left of that position together and got the people who could still be gotten out. He paused. And I know that the man who made the decision that created the situation is still serving. Emily said nothing. She looked at her hands. He has been protected, the general said, by people who have more interest in the institutional reputation of that decision than in the truth of what it cost. His voice was quiet and absolute. I am not one of those people. She looked up. What are you saying? I'm saying that Morrison backing's down this morning is not the end of this. It's a pause. He held her eyes. And I'm saying that when the review opens again, and it will open again, because these things always do, I will be a named witness with documentation that has not previously been submitted to any official body. The weight of what he was saying landed on her all at once. Not the legal weight, not the institutional weight, the personal weight. 3 years of carrying something that had no official resolution. 3 years of being technically exonerated by a discharge document that nonetheless left the actual question. The real question, the one she had asked herself in every quiet moment of every night unanswered. 3 years of not knowing if the truth would ever surface in a place where it could do any good. She looked at General Thomas Harkins and did not trust herself to speak for a moment. You don't have to do that, she said when she could. I know, he said. I'm going to anyway. Ranger pressed his flank against her left leg. She put her hand on his back and kept it there. There's something I need to ask you, the general said, and I need you to think about it before you answer. All right. There is a program, he said. Still active, still funded. Medical support for veterans transitioning through the regional VA network. It operates out of 3 hospitals in this region. Civilian nurses and doctors with military medical backgrounds who work the interface between VA care and civilian hospital systems. He paused. The program has been under-resourced for 2 years. The person running it has been trying to find someone with your specific combination of experience and credentials for considerably longer than that. He looked at her directly. I want to put your name forward. Emily was very still. That's not a small ask. No, he said, it's not. It's higher visibility, more documentation, more official connection between my current life and my previous one. Yes, he said, all of those things. After everything you just told me about the review and the people who want it reopened, the best protection, he said, is not obscurity. I think you know that by now. The best protection is a record so clear and so well documented that anyone who tries to rewrite it has to do so in full view of people who can read. He paused. You built a record in 1 shift, in 12 hours on a floor where nobody knew your name. Imagine what you build in a year. Emily looked at Ranger. The dog looked back at her with those steady, unblinking eyes that had looked at her the same way since the moment she had said 2 words and changed the entire trajectory of the previous night. Can I have time to think about it? She said. Of course, he said. I'm going to be in this hospital for at least a week. Presumably you'll be working. Presumably, she said. He settled back in the wheelchair, slightly the first concession to the fact that he was, whatever his bearing suggested, a man who had been in surgery 12 hours ago and was running on far less reserve than he would prefer anyone to know. There's one more thing, he said. She waited. I spoke to Linda Marsh this morning, before I came down. Emily looked at him with the particular expression of someone who is beginning to understand that General Thomas Harkins conducts his convalescence the way he apparently conducted everything else, which is to say completely and at pace. I told her about your operational background, the specific work, not the classified components, the shape of it, what you did, what it required, what it means in terms of what you're capable of. He paused. She already knew most of it. She'd been building the picture since about 2 in the morning. Linda Marsh is a perceptive woman. She is, Emily said. She said to me, he paused and something moved briefly in his face that was the closest thing to amusement she had seen there. She said, and I'm quoting her precisely, I don't care what she was before. I care what she is now. And what she is now is exactly what this floor needs. Emily sat with that for a moment. Just sat with it. Let it be what it was without deflecting it or managing it or putting it at a careful, survivable distance. That sounds like her, she said. It does, he agreed. She also said that you're on trauma response for the foreseeable future and that if Dr. Caldwell has a problem with that, he can bring it to her directly. Another pause. I don't think Dr. Caldwell has a problem with it. No, Emily said, I don't think he does either. Caldwell appeared in the hallway as if summoned by the mention of his name, which was either coincidence or the specific attunement of a man who had spent the morning thinking about what had happened and had not entirely stopped. He saw the wheelchair, saw the general, saw Emily, and did the brief calculation that was visible in his face. He came over. He looked at Emily first. Bay 3, he said. I was about to find you. The variable BP pattern has clarified. I think it's a medication interaction. Which one? She said. He told her. She considered it for 3 seconds. The beta blocker and the new anti-inflammatory, she said. The timing of the doses is overlapping. That's what I think, he said. Stagger them by 4 hours and monitor response, she said. Already ordered, he said. I wanted you to know the reasoning so you can track it through your shift. They looked at each other. 6 hours ago in a conference room, he had said, I'm glad you were standing in that doorway tonight. The transaction that had occurred in that room had settled into something between them that was not friendship and not quite collegiality, something more specific than either the thing that develops between two people who have been wrong and right in front of each other and decided to stay in the room. Thank you, she said. He nodded, looked at General Harkins. You have 4 more minutes, he said, after which I'll have the orderly bring you back upstairs. 8, the general said. 5, Caldwell said, and walked away. The general watched him go. I like him, he said. He's better than he seemed last night. Emily said. Most people are, Harkins said. Ranger stood up. He stretched a long, complete, unhurried stretch from nose to tail, and then sat back down with his shoulder against Emily's knee in a position that communicated clearly and without ambiguity that he had made arrangements and intended to honor them. He's going to be difficult to board, the general said, looking at his dog. While I'm recovering, he doesn't adjust well to kennels. Emily looked at the dog. The dog looked at her. I have a studio apartment, she said. The general said nothing. It has enough room, she said, if he's well behaved. He is, the general said, extraordinarily well behaved. Then we can discuss it, she said, when you're better. The general looked at his dumb and then at Emily Carter with an expression that was not just gratitude and not just relief and was something she couldn't quite name, except that it felt like the look of a man who had made it to the other side of something he wasn't certain he'd get through and found things there he had not expected to find. The orderly came back. General Dr. Caldwell says, I know what he says, Harkins said. He looked at Emily one last time. Think about the program, he said, when you're ready. I will, she said. The orderly began turning the wheelchair. Ranger stood and moved toward the general, resuming his position at the side of the chair with the automatic precision of an animal who knows his primary job even when he has made new arrangements. He looked back at Emily once over his shoulder as they moved away. Just once. Then he faced forward. She watched them go until they turned the corner toward the elevator. Then she turned around and found Priya behind her, which at this point in their acquaintance was not surprising. Was that, Priya started. Yes, Emily said. Did he just offer you? Yes, Emily said. And the dog? Possibly, Emily said. We're still discussing it. Priya looked at the empty hallway where the general had been. She looked at Emily. She pressed her lips together against something, a laugh or the near cousin of one, the kind that wells up when things turn out better than you had any right to expect. Okay, she said. Bay 3. Bay 3, Emily said. They walked together toward the bay, past the nurse's station where Dennis was charting, and looked up as they passed and gave Emily the small professional nod of someone who has decided where they stand past the supply station, where Terrence was stocking shelves and caught her eye, and offered the fractionally sheepish look of a person who has revised an opinion and is not entirely sure how to communicate the revision, but is trying past the corridor that led to the trauma bay, where 12 hours ago a dog had frozen and a room had gone silent, and the shape of everything had shifted. Bay 3. A 68-year-old man with a variable blood pressure pattern and a medication interaction that had just been identified and would now be corrected. A person who needed someone to come in and look at them and make the next right decision. Emily pulled the curtain, introduced herself, sat down, and before she looked at a single monitor, she looked at the man in the bed. He was nervous. She could see it in the way he held his hands. "Tell me how you've been feeling," she said. "Not the numbers, how you've been feeling." He blinked, relaxed fractionally, and started to talk. Outside the curtain, the floor continued its work. The morning sun had moved past its early angle and was coming through the high windows at the full ordinary brightness of a day that had no idea what the night before had cost or what it had given back. The monitors beeped. The pager system issued its flat electronic tones. Someone laughed near the nurse's station, a real laugh, brief and unguarded, the kind that happens in hospitals when people are doing hard work together and find between the hard parts the small, ordinary moments that make the hard parts survivable. Emily Carter, combat medic, classified operative, honorably discharged, retrained, rebuilt, and standing now on the floor where she intended to stay, sat beside a man who needed her full attention and gave it to him completely. She had come to this city to start over. She had walked into this hospital 12 hours ago planning to be ordinary and quiet and carefully small. She was none of those things. She had never been any of those things. And the floor she was on, and the people she was working with, and the man recovering on the 4th floor, and the dog sitting outside his door, all of it had made the same decision about her that she had finally, in the long hours of this night that was now a morning, made about herself. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. She was doing exactly what she was made to do. And whatever came next, the review, the program, the complicated and unfinished business of a past that was not done with her, she would meet it the same way she met everything. Directly, with full attention, without looking away. Emily Carter had not started over. She had, after 3 years of rebuilding in the wrong direction, finally started forward. And forward, for the first time in a very long time, felt like somewhere she actually wanted to go.